The envelope sat on the passenger seat the whole drive over, and I kept glancing at it the way you glance at something you're not sure you should have brought. It was a standard manila envelope, nothing special about it. My name was typed on the label, in the same font the attorney's office used for everything. Inside was a single document. 12 pages. I'd read it so many times the paper had gone soft at the fold lines. I pulled into the parking structure across from the banquet hall, and sat there with the engine running longer than I needed to. Through the windshield, I could see the entrance. Ballets in vests moving between cars that cost more than I made in 3 years back when I was building the business. There were women in dresses that caught the light when they walked, and men who stood the way men stand when they've never had to apologize for taking up space. My son had picked the venue. Of course he had. I reached over and put the envelope in my jacket's inside pocket. It sat there against my chest the whole time I was getting out of the car. The whole time I was walking across the street. The whole time I was handing my keys to a kid who looked at my 11-year-old Buick like he'd been handed a dead fish. The grand opening of Castellan Group's Western Regional Headquarters was my son's night. That was how he'd described it to his mother's side of the family in the group chat I wasn't part of, but that my sister-in-law had shown me by accident. Biggest night of my career, finally showing this city what we're made of. I'd found out about the event from a press release, an actual press release, the kind that gets sent to business journals and local news affiliates. My daughter-in-law had forwarded it to me with a note that said, "Thought you'd want to see this." So proud of him. 3 exclamation points. I had built the business that became Castellan Group. I want to be careful how I say that, because I'm not a man who needs credit for things. I spent 31 years not needing credit for things. But facts are facts. And the fact is that in 1987, when my son was 4 years old, I started a regional logistics company out of a 2-room office on the east side of Columbus with a second-hand copier and a folding table I'd bought at a church rummage sale. I named it after my wife, Lenora. She passed in 2018. By then, the company had grown beyond anything either of us had imagined when we were eating peanut butter sandwiches over that folding table, staying up past midnight with invoices spread across the floor. After Lenora died, I sold the company to a private equity group for a number I still don't say out loud in casual conversation. I kept a minority stake. I stepped back. My son, who'd come into the business 8 years earlier and had done genuinely good work there, I want to be honest about that. He stayed on to the acquisition. He impressed the new owners. He climbed. Within 4 years, he was running the Western expansion. I was proud of him. I need you to understand that. Whatever happened later, I was proud. The lobby of the banquet hall had been decorated in what I'd call aggressive minimalism. Everything was white and chrome and backlit. There were maybe 200 people already inside, and more coming in behind me. I gave my name at the door, and the young woman checked her tablet and looked up at me with a smile that faltered just slightly before she recovered it. "Mr. Holt," she said. "That's right. One moment." She stepped away and spoke to a colleague, a man in his early 30s who glanced at me, nodded, and came over. "Mr. Holt, thank you so much for coming. We have you at table 22. He said it the way people say things they've been told to say, and are hoping you won't push back on. Table 22 was near the kitchen. Not at the kitchen, but near it, close enough that I could hear the clatter of trays and the occasional raised voice from the catering staff. I sat down and introduced myself to the people already seated, a couple from the firm's Portland office and an older woman who was someone's administrative assistant and who seemed as uncertain about why she was at table 22 as I was. I had been at this company's founding dinner when it still had 8 employees. I had shaken hands with the private equity partners the day they signed the acquisition papers. I had personally guaranteed the line of credit that kept the lights on during the recession of '09. The one my son had been too young to fully understand and too proud to ask about directly. But here I sat, table 22. I ordered sparkling water and looked at the room. My son was across the hall near the stage, moving through the crowd with the ease of someone who had practiced it. He was good at rooms. He got that from his mother. She could walk into any gathering and make it feel like she'd always been there. He had her coloring too. Dark hair, easy smile. He was wearing a suit that fit the way suits fit when someone has measured every inch of you. He caught my eye once briefly and gave me a nod. Not the nod of a son greeting his father. The nod of a host acknowledging an attendee he doesn't need to manage right now. My daughter-in-law was beside him in a dress the color of champagne. She was beautiful in the polished, deliberate way of people who understand that appearance is a form of currency. She did not look at me at all. Her family was at table 3. I know because I counted. At 7:15, my son took the stage. The room quieted in that way. Rooms quiet when someone magnetic is speaking. He was good at this. I had watched him become good at it over the years. And I'll say again, I was proud. He spoke about vision. He spoke about legacy. He thanked his wife. He thanked his leadership team by name. He thanked 3 of his former mentors, 2 of whom I had never met, and one of whom was a professor from his MBA program who had written him a letter of recommendation. He did not mention me. I sat there with my sparkling water and I listened to the whole speech, and when it was over and the applause went up, I clapped along with everyone else. The woman from Portland beside me leaned over and said, "What a remarkable young man." And I said, "Yes," and that was that. After the speech, he came down from the stage and worked the room again, and eventually, about 40 minutes into the cocktail portion of the evening, he made his way to table 22. I stood up when I saw him coming. "Dad." He embraced me quickly, the kind of hug that's more shoulder than anything else. "Glad you could make it." "Wouldn't have missed it," I said. "How was the drive?" "Fine. Columbus traffic." He nodded, glancing over his shoulder at something across the room. "Listen, tonight's pretty packed with obligations, I hope you understand. We'll catch up at dinner next month." There had been no dinners scheduled for next month. "Of course," I said. He started to move away and then turned back, and something crossed his face that I couldn't quite read. Not guilt, exactly. Something adjacent to it. Something he'd learned to smooth over. "Oh, and Dad," I meant to mention. "The announcement we're making tonight. The new funding round. I know you still have the minority stake from the original sale, so the attorneys would have sent you something. I just want you to know we've tried to structure it so existing stakeholders aren't too disrupted." I touched the pocket of my jacket without thinking about it. "I got the paperwork," I said. "Good." He smiled. The host's smile. "We'll talk through it when we have more time." He was gone before I could say anything else. I sat back down and finished my sparkling water and thought about Lenora. I thought about a specific Tuesday in March of 1994, when the company was hemorrhaging money, and she had taken on a second job without telling me because she didn't want me to feel like I was failing. I found out because I saw the paycheck stub in her purse when I was looking for a pen. She'd cried when I asked her about it, not because she was ashamed. Because she'd wanted to protect me from the weight of it a little longer. That's who built this company. That's the legacy he didn't mention tonight. I reached back into my jacket pocket and took out the envelope. The funding round my son had referenced was a restructuring, a dilution, technically. The attorneys had sent me 12 pages explaining how my minority stake, the piece I'd kept when I sold to private equity, the piece that had been quietly appreciating for 6 years while I lived simply in the house Lenora and I had bought in 1991 and never sold, how that stake was being reduced by the new structure. I would still have something. Just not what I'd had before. There was a signature page at the back. I hadn't signed it yet. I sat at table 22, and I thought for a long time. The party went on around me. A string quartet started playing near the stage. Someone gave another speech. More champagne was poured at tables 1 through 10. At 9 o'clock, my son came back over with his wife beside him. She was carrying a glass of something sparkling, and she smiled at me with teeth that were very white, and eyes that were doing something else entirely. "We're about to do the formal announcement," my son said. "Once that goes out, the press will have it. I just wanted to make sure you knew, since you're a stakeholder." "I appreciate that," I said. "So you're good? With everything?" I looked at him. He was 51 years old, and he was standing in a room that existed because of a folding table in a church rummage sale, and his mother working a second job she didn't tell me about. He was standing in this room, and he had put me at table 22 and not said my name from the stage, and told me we'd catch up at dinner next month, when there was no dinner scheduled for next month. "I'm good," I said, "but I'm not going to sign the restructuring documents." The smile didn't leave his face, but something behind it shifted. Dad, I've had the attorneys look at it. My stake is structured gives me blocking rights on deletive rounds. I'm going to exercise those rights. His wife set down her glass of champagne. That's a significant step, my son said very carefully, one that would complicate the announcement tonight. I imagine it would. Dad, we can talk about this privately. We could have talked about it privately 3 months ago when the restructuring was first proposed. No one called me. I stood up because I'm too old to have important conversations sitting down. I got a FedEx package from an attorney's office. No call. No conversation. A FedEx package. Something moved through his expression then. Something real. Maybe the first real thing I'd seen from him all night. The company has advisors, he said. The process is what it is. I know what the company has. I know what the company has. I know what the process is. I helped build the process. I slid the envelope across the table toward him. That's my copy of the original stakeholder agreement. The one with my signature on it, from the day of the acquisition. I want you to have it. He looked at it. He didn't pick it up. I'm going home, I said. Congratulations on the expansion. I mean that. I buttoned my jacket, and I walked through the party, and I gave my ticket to the kid at the valet stand, and I drove home in my 11-year-old Buick with the heat on, because the nights had turned cold. I didn't hear from my son that night. I didn't hear from him the next morning either. I heard from his attorney at 9:47 a.m., a measured woman who explained that the company was very eager to reach an understanding, and that a deletive round of this nature was common in growth phase companies, and that she was sure we could find a structure that worked for all parties. I told her I was sure we could too. I told her I had my own attorneys. What followed was 4 months that I don't fully know how to describe to you, without it sounding like something from a business school case study, which is not what it was. It was a father and a son, and a company that had started as something personal and become something else, and the question of what that something else was owed to, where it had come from. My son called me twice during those 4 months. The first call lasted 6 minutes. He was precise and careful the way he'd been at the party. He talked about fiduciary responsibility and market timing and investor expectations. I listened to all of it. At the end I said, "Do you remember the folding table?" He was quiet for a moment, and then he said he had a meeting. The second call lasted 22 minutes and was different. His voice had a quality in it I hadn't heard in a long time. Something younger, something less rehearsed. He said that he knew the dinner next month comment had been a brush-off. He said that he'd been embarrassed by things he couldn't fully explain, and that the seating at the event had not been his direct decision, but that he hadn't corrected it either, and that he knew the difference between those two things. I let him talk. "I didn't mention you in the speech," he said finally. "No," I said. "You didn't. I don't have a good explanation for that. I'm not asking for one. I know." He was quiet again. "What are you going to do with the blocking rights?" "I haven't decided yet." That was true when I said it. It wasn't true 2 weeks later when I sat down with my attorney, a man named Forsyth who had been handling my affairs for 17 years, and who was the kind of lawyer who told you what he actually thought instead of what you wanted to hear. Forsyth had reviewed everything and presented me with 3 options. I chose the one that surprised him. I did not block the round. Instead, I exercised a different right, one that was also in the original stakeholder agreement. The right of first refusal on any buyout of my minority position. I invoked it preemptively. What that meant, in practical terms, was that I set the price at which my stake could be purchased, and I set it at full current valuation, not at the discounted rate the new funding structure had implied. The company could either pay me fairly for what I'd helped build or restructure around me. Either way, I'd put a number on what had been quietly being diminished. They paid. I won't tell you the exact figure, and I don't want you to think this story is about money, because it isn't. It never was. But I will tell you that the payment came through on a Thursday in November, and that I drove to the cemetery that afternoon and sat for a while at Lenora's grave and told her about it. I told her about the folding table as if she'd forgotten. I told her I'd been at a party where no one said her name, and that I thought she deserved to know that somewhere in the accounting of that company, her name was still in there. In the early invoices, in the late nights, in the line of credit that got signed because a banker named Pickering had known us for 15 years and trusted that we'd make good. Her name was in all of it. My son came to see me the following Sunday. He drove up from the city alone, without his wife, which told me something. He sat at the kitchen table, the actual kitchen table in the house he'd grown up in, and he had coffee, and he didn't make small talk, which I respected. "I owe you more than an apology," he said. "You don't owe me anything," I said, because that was also true. I had done what I'd done to collect a debt. "That's not the same as me not having behaved badly." "No," I said. "It's not the same." He looked around the kitchen, at the cabinets Lenora had picked out, at the window over the sink with the view of the backyard where I'd put up a batting cage when he was 9, at the photograph on the refrigerator that his daughter, my granddaughter Opal, had made for me when she was 5, a drawing of our family in crayon where I am inexplicably taller than the house. "Why didn't you just block the round?" he asked. "Because I didn't want to hurt the company," I said. "Whatever's happened between you and me, there are 200 employees in that organization who didn't seat me at table 22. The company is separate from that." He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I've been ashamed of things I shouldn't have been ashamed of." I poured him more coffee. "Your mother and I were never embarrassed by what we had or what we didn't have," I said. "We knew what we were building toward. We just didn't always know if we'd get there." I set the pot down. "You got there. That's real. I'm not taking anything away from what you built on top of what we started, but you can't erase the foundation and still stand on it." He nodded. He didn't say anything, but he nodded the way people nod when they're actually hearing something, not just waiting to respond. He stayed for 3 hours. We talked about things that weren't the company. We talked about Opal, who had decided at age 7 that she wanted to be a marine biologist and had not wavered in that conviction in the 2 years since. We talked about a fishing trip we'd taken to the Upper Peninsula when he was 14 that had been a complete disaster. 3 days of rain and not a single fish, and somehow the best 3 days we'd had together in years. We talked about Lenora. Before he left, he stood at the door and he said, "The speech. I should have mentioned you. And her. I don't know why I didn't." He looked at me steadily when he said it. His mother's eyes. "I'm going to spend some time thinking about that." "That's all I'd ask," I said. He drove away, and I stood in the doorway for a while after the car had turned the corner. The street was quiet. The maple in the front yard had gone completely orange, the way it did every year right around this time. Lenore had planted it the year we moved in. It was taller than the house now. I went back to the kitchen, and I washed the 2 coffee cups and dried them and put them away. The folding table from the church rummage sale was gone a long time ago, but I kept one thing from that first office. A small framed piece of paper, a quote I'd typed up and taped to the wall above the copier back in 1987. Something I'd read somewhere that had stuck with me. "What you build is only as strong as what you remember you are." It sits on my desk now, in the house on the street with the orange maple. I read it sometimes in the mornings. I feel, more often than not, like myself.